writer for Asbury Park Press. He also teaches at Brookdale Community College. And today he's going to talk about the shipwrecks of the Barrier Island, mainly Island Beach State Park, down to the inlet. So let's welcome Dan Radel.
It shows up really good. I'm a believer in Murphy's Law, that what can go wrong can go wrong, you know. So I'm glad this is up on the screen here. If you can't hear me back there, just raise your hand and I'll speak. Just remind me to speak louder. I have a bit of a soft voice, but I do quite a bit of lectures. As you said, I write for the Asbury Park Press, and I teach history at Brookdale Community College. And Shipwrecks is something new. It's a new lecture that I've started. I've talked about a lot of things. I was asked to do one in Long Branch. They have a thing called History in Motion, and they got a lot of history in Long Branch and a lot of historians. So I was like, I gotta find something where I'm not stepping on anyone's toes. And so I said, how about shipwrecks? There's quite a few off of Long Branch. There's quite a few all up and down this coast. We've got over 120 miles of beach. And you know, back in the day of sail, a lot of these boats, they stayed close to the shore and they hit sandbars and tragedy struck. And you know, I'm surprised for such a desolate place, like, you know, it's an end of the world Island Beach State Park. You got quite a bit of history here. I grew up in Brielle. I don't know, I'm pretty sure everyone knows where that is, right? Just not far from here. So I grew up working in Bogan's Basin, and you know, I fished a lot of the shipwrecks, and fortunately never became one of them. There was one time I thought we were close. I was counting my Hail Marys. We were out in the Hudson Canyon, late November, and this is like 1995, and we were doing really good with the yellowfin tuna, and my captain wanted to stay a little bit longer, and we caught the quota. At the same time, there was a storm rolling in, and at this point, we have advanced information. We know when storms are coming. We thought we had the window a little bit longer, and then the waves started getting rough, and I remember, or bigger, rowing bigger. I remember being in the bow of the boat and going up to try and gap a tuna, and then going down and watching the tuna right here. I was like, probably could have pulled the fish into the boat. Everything's fine. I've been out in plenty of weather like that. It wasn't the weather that scared me that day. And we'll talk a lot of times, it's a malfunction. Just as something goes wrong, and that's the problem. So our engines didn't start. And luckily we had these diesel mechanics from Pennsylvania were on the boat that day. I was on the Atlantis, which is a 110-foot steel boat, and our engines weren't starting. Those guys went downstairs and they tinkered with it, and they got one engine up and our alternate generator going. So then what should have been an 8-hour drive from the Hudson Canyon turned into about a 15-hour hell ride as we're going up and just sliding. And if we lose that engine, we're done, Pete. You know, we're done. And we're just adrift. And, you know, and tragedy happens in the ocean just like that. I'm going to talk about, you know, some of the shipwrecks. I picked a few that happened here in Island Beach State Park. I myself am not as familiar with Island Beach State Park as you guys are. I came down here, I started coming down here, and it's not like I didn't grow up that far away either. We had a house in Seaside Park. I just never came to Island Beach State Park. One of the first times I did something really stupid. I parked and I tried to walk to the inlet on a hot day. I mean, I thought it was just a short walk, you know. I got my tackle box and fishing rod, because I was doing the fishing reports for the Fisherman magazine, and it took me forever. I'm never going to do this again. This is kind of stupid. It is a long stretch of beach here, right? And I love the fact that it's not developed, and I love the fact that it's preserved. And I was kind of sad to hear about the end of the fishing shacks, and that legacy is over. But this is a really nice museum. There's a lot of artifacts here, and I'm kind of intimidated because I'm looking on the wall here. You've got a couple of the shipwrecks that I'm going to talk about, but my information differs from what you have on here, okay? And the reason is because I work for the Asbury Park Press, okay? And I've been writing about shipwrecks that happen right now. Okay, we had a boat go down in Manasquan Inlet 2 years ago, and a kid died, a young man died, and that boat's still out there. So stuff gets rediscovered, and so I'm always the reporter that's been reporting on this stuff, and I'm kind of a niche writing right there. I do the outdoor fishing reports, so that's kind of what I got our information from. The lecture that I'm about to give you comes from the Asbury Park Press archives. I specifically picked our archives. Now there's lots of books on shipwrecks, but the guys at the scene getting the information. And then what I also did is I used the New Jersey Maritime Museum, the one down in Beach Haven. They have excellent source of information. I love those guys. I was down there not too long ago when they blew the the Angiadoria foghorn. They had found it in 250 feet of water. Unfortunately, that gentleman, Joe Manzari, he passed away this summer. He died diving in over 200 feet of water in the Jordan's Bank. It's a tragedy. He knew what he knew what he was up against. He knew the life he was living. He was an adventurer. But he blew that foghorn anyway. So what I was doing was using their map, hovering over some of the locations and being like, all right, do we have information on that? What kind of information do we have? So that's basically where this information comes from in today's lecture. But I was also thinking about, where should I start? There's so many shipwrecks along this coastline here. The names are different. When I look in the Asbury Park Press, we don't see Island Beach State Park. We don't even see the name Island Beach show up, okay? A lot of times they're referencing, like one of the wrecks is 5.5 miles north of Barnegat Lightship. Okay, you guys know Barnegat Lightship, right? We'll talk, if you don't, I'll familiarize with it in a little bit. Or they used to call it Barnegat City, a few miles north of Barnegat City. And then in, I think around 1948 or something, Barnegat City becomes, at least in our report, it becomes Barnegat Light. Now we're located up in Asbury Park at this time. This area was not too populated. How they got their information, a lot of the information they got, we have to get it through the sources. Sometimes, I don't know if we actually sent a reporter all the way down here. I don't know how he would have got here in time. Some of the shipwrecks I'll talk about, like the Sumner sat here all week. We just got battered. We may have got the information, we spoke a lot to the life-saving stations, U.S. life-saving stations, but when you see wrecks here referenced in the newspaper or even at the New Jersey Maritime Museum, it wrecked at Cedar Creek. And I'm scratching my head. I know there's a ton of Cedar Creeks in the Pinelands. They're all over the place, right? But what specific Cedar Creek are you talking about? They're just talking about the life-saving station that was here from like 1872 to 1917, so it references that. Some of these I have a lot of information on, so I'm just going to kind of talk about it briefly. But one of the first ones was the Llewelynn. Anyone familiar with the Llewelynn? Okay, no one? Perfect. There's not a whole lot of information about the Llewelynn. The reason why I bring it up is because we had a very tough winter this year, right? A lot of ice. I mean, I don't know if it was tough or if you love winter, it's a great winter, right? If you like to ice skate, if you like to sleigh ride, if you ice fish, this was a great winter. They caught a muskellunge up in Greenwood Lake, not February 24th. It might be they're debating right now, is it going to be a New Jersey state record? Because that's a border lake. The guy wants it to be a record. But he dug, he went out there with his auger, ripped a hole in the ice and caught this big fish. So there was a lot of that going on. And we also had a little calamity right up in Kingsbury. They lost their fishing pier. Half of it got ripped away by the ice. And so I was looking about the Llewelynn. What happened to the Llewelynn? It wrecked not too far west of us in Barnegat Bay. And I was like, wow, how did this wreck in Barnegat Bay? And it was 1886, December 1886. There was an early freeze. It was a cold winter, not like the one that would come a couple years later, the bad winter of like 87, 88 that they talked about. The one that ruined Teddy Roosevelt's ranch out in Dakota, lost all his cattle, right? But this one was bad. It froze up, and I read I couldn't find any information on the Llewelynn around here, so I went up to Red Bank, looked at the Red Bank Register, which has a lot of archives, and they were talking about Oystermen on Raritan Bay were having a really tough winter because they couldn't do anything. And so I'm believing this is what happened to the Llewelynn, is it said the only information I could find was it got grounded in shallow water. So I'm imagining that this boat just froze in the bay and just the ice just cracked it. On boat there was, that was December 3rd, 1886. I had a cargo of oysters worth $25 that was totally lost. So that's quite a bit of money in that time period, for sure. That was something, you know, I bet that hurt them a little bit to lose that. You know, the bay, as you all know, used to be filled with oysters. Used to get off the, you know, the Tuckerton train and stuff. They used to go out there and pick that stuff. So it was a Raritan Bay. I would love, you know, to get those back. I don't know if we ever grow those oysters again. This one here, you guys are familiar with this one, right? This made some news, I think, not too long. It was when a storm, this fall. So we get this, right? All of a sudden, we get a shipwreck uncovered. And so this was the remnants of the Lawrence Mackenzie. I'm not sure exactly where on. Maybe you guys might know if it was north. I'm pretty sure it was north of where we are right now. A little further north up is where this wrecked. This was a schooner and wood with a cargo of oranges that in 1890 were worth $2,000, but in today's money that would be worth $71,000 of oranges, right? Quite a bunch of oranges, a lot of vitamin C. Gone. This one was traveling from Puerto Rico to New York City. All 8 crew members survived. The interesting thing about some of these stories is that Puerto Rico was still part of the Spanish Empire at this time when this happened. You know, we didn't have the Spanish-American War until 1898, and then Puerto Rico, you know, was part of the Spanish Empire. Then they let it go, and then now it's kind of a part of our country. So this is just some of the ribs. You never know. You never know what the tide's going to bring in or what the tide is going to take away when it comes to the ocean. There's a lot of things. This one you have on the wall, right here. I saw this coming in. I said, uh-oh, my information. March 6, 1914, Shaw named Howard Jr. found her descent just off the coast of Island Beach in Forked River life-saving station who responded and saved all 18 crew members. I have contradictory information than that. Yes, the crew members were saved, but not by the Forked River life-saving station. So let's talk about that one. So March 6th is when it hit ground. March 7th is when we reported it in the paper, and it was still there. So what happens on March 7th, 1914? This was just, you know, days really before, just months before the start of World War I. We have, this boat is a wooden freighter. It's struck a sandbar, and we reported it in a depth of 7 fathoms, so that's 40 feet of water. I don't know how high up that sandbar was or how deep a drop this boat had when it hit that thing, but it just boom, it stops. It was carrying coal, a big cargo of coal on it, and it was, as you can imagine, it was dense fog, right? And we're talking 1914. The steamer was en route from Norfolk, Virginia. It was going to Boston. The captain was H.B. Simmons, and this is 18 crew. We have 21 crew down, reported in the paper. 21 crew members on this boat. The vessel belonged to the New England Coal Company of Boston. She was built in Cleveland, Ohio in 1886, and her home port was London, Connecticut. They had left Norfolk, Virginia on February 25th. And were on their way with their coal, and they sprung a leak. So they had to go back to port, get the leak fixed. Then he took off again on March 4th. And later, the captain was interviewed. He said, I should have never taken this trip. He said, I should have known back then this boat, we were doomed for this voyage. But nonetheless, they had to get the coal up to Boston. So on their way, they went on March 4th. Now, they also had another problem, too. This boat had wireless communication. It could radio. Now, we don't have a lot of radio towers here on the coast here, so they were radioing Seagate which was a Marconi radio station, wireless station, up in where Coney Island is today. So they were trying to reach that to tell them that they were in trouble. They couldn't get the signals out. So I don't know who spotted this boat first or how it was done. It was not too far off the coast here, but it was snowing. All right, it's one of those March storms, right, that we get when the last time, I don't want to see any more snow until next year. I'm done, I'm good, right?
Yeah.
I think we're in the clear. I mean, today is like my favorite day of the year. It's like daylight savings. I know it's kind of tough, but I love the fact that it's going to be light out till 7 o'clock tonight, right? Nice and it's warm today. It actually is warm, warmer. So they could never reach Marconi Station. So they're out there, they're taking a beating, and then I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Old Dominion liners. There used to be kind of a steamships that would go from Norfolk, Virginia to New York City daily. You know, there were two of them. They had two. The Old Dominion had two. They had the SS Hamilton and the SS Jefferson. So named after Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, I assume. I'm assuming that. I don't know, but that makes the most sense. Well, the Hamilton passed the Charlemagne Tower and just kept on going. And later on, when Simmons, who's the captain, gets to Norfolk, what is he got words for these guys? He said, "You didn't see me out there? Oh, we thought you were okay. We thought the life-saving station had it all under charge." He's like, "No, that's not. You guys, I sent you signals and you went past me." Boy, was he angry. So at the time this report was made in the paper, they call them revenue cutters. Revenue cutters, not Coast Guard cutters. The Coast Guard wasn't named the Coast Guard just yet. In 1914, it was still, the U.S. Life Saving Service was its own entity, and the revenue cutters was its own entity. And we know the revenue cutters was started in 1790 by Alexander Hamilton to chase after illegal shipping, and that's what it was there for, to chase down people trying to get into ports with illegal cargoes, collect custom duties. That's why we had revenue cutters. So these guys, so John Cole is the superintendent of the U.S. life-saving stations. I'm sure you might have heard his name. I'm not sure what exact station he was at, but he is able finally to radio Marconi, and from New York they send the revenue cutter Ithaca to come searching for these guys. They've never found anyone. 4 gentlemen on this boat took a little dinghy, and now it's the day is turning into night, and they're rowing into these waves. They tried to send, I believe, life station Barnegat. The life saving station in Barnegat sent some boats out, and they got capsized. They couldn't get over the breakers, so nobody could get out to this boat. So they came to shore themselves. 4 guys rowed with 1 oar, and just taking turns battling these waves until they finally reached the shore here and said, "Okay, you know." And then they started telling the story. The captain, Simmons, H.B. Simmons, and the other 17 crew members stayed on the boat for as long as they could, and it took a workboat, the last boat that they had, and left as this thing was getting pounded and sinking, filling with, it had 7, once it hit ground in 1 hour, it had 7 feet of water in there. So it was a desperate situation. The story we have is that they were lost at sea for 8 hours, just adrift. As it's snowing, as it's cold, it's going up and down. No cutter found her. The boat that found her was the Jefferson, part of the Old Dominion line. They're going back and forth, back and forth. They're on their way back from New York City to Norfolk, Virginia. They picked them up. They brought them back to Norfolk. And when they got to Norfolk, you know, we have a report on that. And this is when Simmons is complaining and yelling about the fact that the Hamilton went right past him. Then they took those gentlemen from Norfolk, and this was a crew from all over the world. Okay, this was a crew, a lot of different people on this crew, and they brought them back up to New York, their final destination, and said, "Okay, well, off you, or one of their destinations, and off you go." Boat was a total wreck. So that is the Charlemagne story. I'm curious where that information came from. I want to talk to that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The museum down
I'm not going to say she's
Yeah.
wrong, but I talked to her. Maybe we can get you a new one.
Okay. That's, all that stuff over there is from them.
They are fascinating. They you know, I'm just what we have in. I show the Asbury Park Press. This is what they reported at the time. I mean, news does get things wrong, but we were pretty good at getting these kind of facts down. So this is you know, I was like, where's the Cedar Creek station? It's like, this is what it looked like. I saw there's a picture on the wall of it, so we have that. No longer done by 1917. It was no longer service. And this is Seagate. This is the Brooklyn. This is a postcard. So this is Marconi. As we know, Marconi was here too. I think you guys, someone was just talking about him. He was over there in Wall. They have Camp Evans. So, you know, wireless station and just a radio into things. So that's that. Now, I didn't see this one on the wall. So this is the Sumner. I don't know if anyone knows the story of the Sumner or has heard of the Sumner. This was a fascinating story. I was trying to find ones that may not be well known to talk about. The Sumner was a United States transport vessel, and it sunk here in December 12, 1916, just outside of Barnegat Inlet, just a little to the south. They reference Barnegat City, they reference Lovelace. When you look on the map, it's just outside of the inlet. It hit a sandbar. Just shifting sands. You guys go down, you ever heard of was it Horseshoe Island now? Outside of Great Bay Inlet? That one just formed, probably because of all the beach replenishment pushed sand, but there's just a lot of sand moving constantly. So how far out these sandbars were, I really don't know, but this one was, you know, a few hundred yards off the beach. So what was this under? And this is a picture from the Asbury Park Press. We went down there, so it was sitting, this boat sat for a week, and we just kept reporting on it and kept reporting on it. So it is 1916, December 12th, 1916. What's going on in the world in 1916? World War I, right? Okay. This wasn't hit by any floating mine or torpedo. That wasn't its issue. This thing just, in a fog, hit a shoal and got stuck, and just couldn't wiggle out of its situation. It was just before this voyage. Its voyage before this was to Tampico, Mexico. So what's going on in Mexico at the time is they're in a revolution, right? You got Pancho Villa, and it's getting dangerous in Mexico. And the word in Navy circles was to get Americans or United States citizens out of Mexico. And so they went to Tampico. They went to the port, the Sumner, which is a transport. It was built in the 1880s, 1886, 1888 in Hamburg, Germany, where this one was built. It was 351 feet long. So it went to Tampico to get the U.S. citizens out of Tampico, and it picked up 665 people, and it took them to Tampa, Florida. And then they're like, go to Panama Canal and get soldiers, and it's their families, civilians and crew. So the newspaper reports varied from day to day. It was hard getting information, and even to this day, it is hard getting information. I just can't take Bob's word off the street. Bob can be wrong, Bob can have heard wrong, he could be lying, who knows where Bob got his information. I have to get it from the police, I have to get it from the Coast Guard, I have to get it from a source that's credible, that would have this information. So they're trying as hard as they can to get information. How many people were on the boat? So originally it was just 300, and then I saw by the end of our reporting it was up to 400 people were on the Sumner. Now, why did we go enter World War I? What was one of the deciding factors that pushed the United States into World War I? You didn't know I was gonna ask him questions. I'm asking questions because there's a test next week. That was one of the, shipping was an issue, but that didn't sink, that sunk in 1950. So, now we're in 1960, now and then we had Wilson was able to get a kind of a handshake deal out of Germany to stop sinking ships, and they kept that for a little while, and then they rescinded on that. Shipping, sinking our ships was one reason. What was another reason that drew us into World War I? No.
Zimmerman telegram?
It's always one person in the crowd. Right. The Zimmerman telegram, this top secret, we were able to intercept this message. So the Zimmerman telegram, if you're not familiar with it, was Germany trying to tell Mexico, enter the war. If you enter the war, we'll give you back all the territory if we successfully win this war. When peacetime comes, we'll give you back Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, everything that they lost in the Spanish-American War. So Mexico, I don't know if they were serious or even considered it, but when Woodrow Wilson got that, he said, okay, all right, this is getting a little close to the home front, they're kind of challenging me. So the U.S. would enter the war in 1917. But right now, Sumner was trying to get everybody out of Mexico, and this on the second trips are coming out of Panama. So they left Panama, they're traveling with their family, they left December 4th, and so they get up here to this stretch of beach, and they're coming up the coast, and they struck sand and they stopped. And it's December 12th, 1916. They were weighed down by 2,000 pounds of scrap iron were in the boat. So that is in the hull and driving the hull into the sand. Now, first there wasn't any problems with weather, but then weather started changing. They started getting pummeled by waves, and they were able to, the captain of the boat was, his name was B.E. Weber. And so he was able to send an SOS to Marconi. His first SOS was weather calm, smooth seas, ship on sandy bottom, tide going out, wind light, westerly, thick fog. It happened about midnight, right? And it was so quiet of a, we're stuck, and now we're stuck, that nobody even woke up. None of the passengers knew what happened. And they come up the next day, look outside, and they say, we're looking at Barnegat City. That we're not, we're stuck. Why are we here? Everybody's stuck on this boat. And it's, it would be Barnegat City. That's how we reported it. And then by 1948, we're starting to call it Barnegat Light. But at this time, we referred to it as Barnegat City. So now it's the Coast Guard, because the Coast Guard was created, the name change happened in January 28th, 1915. They took the U.S. Lifesaving Service and the Revenue Cutter, and they combined them, and they made the Coast Guard. So after January 28th, 1915, we started to refer to everything in the paper as the Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard sent out the cutter Seneca, coming down from New York to assist, and then they got tugboats coming from Norfolk, Virginia, and Newport, Rhode Island, right? Did you get that right? Newport and Norfolk. And there was also a couple of private steamers that were called. I don't know if anyone's ever been out when there's been distress or something like that. I was on a boat one time when some nutcase decided to jump off one of the party boats, and we all had to pick anchor. We were blue fishing, and we had to pick anchor and go search for this guy. And we found, I don't know, he had problems at home, and he decided he was going to jump it, and this is it. And then somewhere in that cold water, he changed his mind, and they found him hugging a buoy with hypothermia, so he'd been hugging that thing for quite a while. So one of these steamers is like, oh man, do we really have to divert to this? So he calls back and he says, I love this line, he says, are you guys really in danger? And the Sumner radio's back. He says, waves hitting us hard, we need assistance at once. Our captain would not have sent an SOS if we did not. I mean, you're talking to the actual Army, you're talking to the United States government here. It was called, in the paper, they called it a shipwreck without thrills. So that's a good thing, right? So Barnegat Life Saving Station sent a bunch of boats out, or a couple boats, and they were able to get everyone off, all the passengers off the boat. The Army stayed on the boat. You know, the captain goes down with the boat, so whoever was on the boat to the last minute. It was a shipwreck without thrills, other than some ladies getting their dresses a little wet, climbing down to the rope ladder, to the lifeboats. So it got stuck on Monday, and every day in the paper, we have these little blips, these little briefs. It's still there. The idea was to get some ropes on her and pull her out off of the ground here. But she was they considered her an old boat, 1888, 1916, so she was like 30 years old. It didn't seem to be that old to me. But nonetheless, they're pulling on her and they're pulling on her, and they ripped her apart. They pulled her seams apart. She floods with water. Everybody gets off the boat. And then the last story we had of this boat was December 29th. A Point Pleasant contractor named J. Edward Harrington was negotiating with the Treasury Department to buy it because it had all this scrap iron in it, and it was metal itself. You wanted to buy it and scrap it and junk it and sell the parts. And unfortunately, we don't follow up with this story, which is a problem. You know, sometimes in news we start stories, we don't finish them, we don't follow them to the end. So I don't know. I mean, I could do some more deep diving, whatever happened, but it looks like this puppy just went down to the bottom of the ocean, and that's where it sits. The submarine. Now this guy here, well, is he unlucky or is he lucky? I found this story just blew my mind. This is fascinating. This guy's story here. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of George Morehouse. He probably has some relatives still around. Some of his sons might be still around. He lived, his house is still there, 255 Allen Place, Long Branch. He was a commercial fisherman, and I'm looking for spots to talk about, right? And I see this one, it's the Reliable. There was a lot of wrecks, right? So I picked one, the Reliable, and I'm reading up on it. So this fella here, George Morehouse, he had bought himself a 110-foot Navy subchaser. So these subchasers were built and operated in World War I, operated in World War II, and then a lot of these boats became party boats afterwards. And this guy here, he purchased this one, the Reliable. It was 110 foot. And so he was fishing, I don't know what he was fishing for, but he was 5 miles off the coast, and we have it down as Seaside Park in Barnegat City, now Barnegat Lake, on July 5th, 1948. He called it the most harrowing experience, and I have been in the fishing trade for 31 years. So what happened is, there was an explosion in the engine room. They were down an engine already, the generator backfired, it ignited gas. His son, Edward, got burned up pretty bad. And they fought it for an hour, as long as they could fight it. And then they said, we gotta go. So they jumped in a workboat, and they were adrift for 6 hours. The Coast Guard did send a boat out, but the first one missed them, and then a second one was approaching. They call it a picket, Coast Guard picket. So they had this oar, and they wrapped it up, and they're waving the oar in the air. And 6 hours later, after the sinking, they're rescued. And it's like, this is you're safe, right? So he goes back home. Now we don't have that original story in the newspaper. We missed that one. But we did meet him later in November and went down and talked to him. And lo and behold, he bought himself a second sub chaser. This one, again, 110 foot. The first one was partially covered by insurance, so he got some money back. And then he buys this one, and we interviewed him, and he's like, well, this is the only thing I know is fishing. I already sunk once. Not gonna happen twice, right? Can't happen twice. So he goes out, and they get this boat, and what they would do is he stripped down the officer quarters, and then they, so he could have a 90,000-pound fish cap. And then they're out fishing. And if you look on the shipwreck map, it is less than a millimeter from where the Reliable went down. The sea hack, he called this one the sea hack. The sea hack goes down. Sprung a leak in the bilge pump, and the boat starts sinking, and they can't paddle it out. So again, George Morehouse and son, now he's got his son George with him and 2 other crew members. They get in a dinghy, and they're just rowing in a dinghy. And luckily for Morehouse, there's a Coast Guard weather boat called the Rockaway. It's a 312-foot boat. Just happened on him. Now, we put it down in the paper is he sunk 5.5 miles from the Barnegat Lightship. And the Barnegat Lightship, you guys know the story of the Barnegat Lightship, you know, it was built in like 1904, right? And originally it was down in Cape May, World War II, it was patrolling Delaware Bay, looking for Germans, right? And then after the war, they moved it to Barnegat Light, inland, outside, I think it was like 8 miles, and it was just sat there. And it was manned by the Navy, and it had a foghorn every 30 seconds, and they would go out. I must have been crazy on that boat, right? You had to get used to that sound every 30 seconds. But I interviewed one of the guys on that boat, and they had a good time. He was there for the last 2 years. He said they used to jump off the boat, do a little swimming, fishing off the boat. The fishermen used to go by all the time and throw stuff up there, and they would throw stuff down. So it was a novelty, an interesting thing. And then, this is before Llewelynn now. And then they got Llewelynn, and they didn't need this thing to identify the inlet anymore. And so they moved it, and today it is in Camden, stuck in mud at Pineport Marina, with the Delaware River and Cooper River. It's just sitting there. Not too far from where the alligator supposedly sits. That was the very first submarine that we ever built. It was a Priogenitor, one that was modeled. Others modeled that one. They believe it's on the Rancocas Creek or something, just stuck in mud too. But underneath, so deep underneath the mud, they haven't been able to locate it yet. And they need they've had some hits on there. I forget what they're using, some magnetometer to find metal. But to go down there and kind of dig up the alligator would probably pull it to pieces. It's probably so rusted and rotted. To move it would be very dangerous to move that thing. And they haven't quite located it just yet. But I don't know if you guys know the story of the alligator, but it's out there waiting to be found. Couldn't happen to Morehouse a third time, could it? No, not a third time. Oh, wait a minute. So he goes and gets himself another boat. This one is called the, you got a name, what do you call this one? Yeah, a 180-foot trawler, 35 tons, the Mary A. Edwards. And November 6, 1950, like 2 years after the Sea Hag, and you know, this one then. This one, he gets a call in the middle of the night, and he said, George, you know where your boat is? He says, it's at the dock. They're like, no, it's not, George. It's gone. It's out in the bay. So it was a storm, had freed its line, its mooring line, and it drifted out into San Diego Bay. So George went out there again and had to rescue his boat. His son fought in Korea, survived Korea, but had trouble surviving his father. I'm not kidding. He's working at his dad moved to Rumson, 23 Ward Avenue, and his son was working on the stove, and the stove blew up. and burnt him to pieces. And so he goes to the hospital and gets bandaged up and whatnot. I mean, just, like I say, is the guy lucky or is he unlucky? Because, I mean, he had some bad luck, but he lived, right? He lived through it. And then he died. I followed George to his death in 1979. So he lives. And his sons, I don't know the end of their story, but they might be around here. I never know. They could pop in the room with them. All right, so let's see here. So the last one I was going to talk about is this one here. There's been a lot of World War II, even World War I. A lot of ships went down, right? It's surprising how close to the shore the Germans were. And you got the, I guess that's a Persephone or Persephone? 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 I usually need a couple times with the word before I get this to ask a couple questions, so forget it. So the Persephone, I believe that one was like right off the coast, right like feet off the coast, and it hits a floating landmine. I think no, that one was torpedo. I'm sorry, that one was torpedo. Torpedoed about 1942. So there was a bunch here. Now, guys, I worked for the Bogans, and during World War II, they were a lot of fishermen became part of the auxiliary. Coast Guard Auxiliary was like this new thing forming, and it just needed eyes and ears on the ocean. So these guys, the Bogans, they participated in the Morro Castle rescue, and I grew up working for them. They were out there when the Reeser got torpedoed, RP Reeser went down, and we fished on all these wrecks. That's what they became after their graveyards, but afterwards they became fishing sites. And we went out there, not me personally, but they found them, they marked them, and they kept fishing on them. And what happens is these wrecks, they break down, they're no longer, they get moved, they get buried in sand. So we need that substrate to keep the fish here. So then in the 80s, they started building all those artificial reefs up and down the coast. So we have some kind of habitat to hold fish. But I've been on a lot of these wrecks. I fished the Tolton, the Texas Tower was a nifty one that went down. That was an old radio tower. That was a Cold War tower, supposed to give us a little heads up if you were going to get bombed by the Russians. So fished on a lot of these. There was also a bunch that were not torpedo, but hit landmines right off the coast here in World War I. They could just leave these things and go by them. So there was the San Saba hit a mine 15 miles east of Barnegat by a U-boat. The Chaparro was a Cuban sugar ship that hit a mine in 1918. I could have picked any one of these to kind of wrap up, but I figured everyone knows these stories of like the Reeser and the so this one here, I thought was, but now it looks nice. I say, okay, looks like you have a picture of it. So this was a naval blimp disaster off of Barnegat Bay. What was the year? July 7th, 1960. So we're in Cold War period. We're not quite at the Cuban Missile Crisis, but we're a couple years shy of that. So the blimp, the Navy would use these blimps. They use them during the wars to spot subs. The eyes and just go up there and monitor. So this one, I don't know all the story of this one. I kind of ran out of time, but there was 20 people on this blimp, and only 3 survived. And we had interviews with the survivors in the hospital. I'm surprised the Army let us talk to them, because they don't today. You gotta go, you wanna get information from them, you gotta get a lot of clearances. But we were in the hospital, they have no idea. There was a malfunction. The helium started leaking out of this thing very quickly. It was 400 feet big, and it hits the water just outside. Imagine seeing that, right? It hits. That happened not too long ago down off of Long Beach Island. You guys remember the guy had a single Cessna and he was flying and he hit the water and he swims out to land. That was kind of amazing little mishap. So this one lands, and 17 men are trapped on this boat in the car underneath it, and we never recovered them alive. The Barnegat Light, the Doris May, I don't know if you guys know the Ebleys, right? Big fishing family out of Barnegat Light. They rushed to the scene and were able to rescue the 3 men that did survive and get them to shore. And they're talking, the interview with one of the guys was like, it just happened. It was a mechanical problem. Nobody heard anything, and it just went down. Right? Everyone been in the blimp? I was in the blimp. They're cool. I was on the guys literally like pedaling in this thing. And I was in the horizon. They're at wall. They dock at wall. We went up there, and it was really fun to be in the blimp. I mean, it was really relaxing, and you're down here, just floating, drifting. It's cool. They got a light, and they got the anchors to hold it down. And there's literally people out there like cutting the ropes loose, and then off you go. And then I figure if you're gonna lose air, you have time to come down. But in this situation, it's just 400 feet, it just sank very quickly, hit the ground, and 17 people were died. And again, sometimes the news reports, trying to find the people. You get information, and you get more information, and then contradicting information before you get the final story. But this is at a point in time the Navy was saying, well, blimps are obsolete. We have helicopters, we have airplanes, and so this is the end of using blimps in the Navy. But not before there was a major tragedy. This is the second blimp tragedy for us, right? We had the Hindenburg hit down, catch fire, and blow up at Lyndhurst. That was a pretty tragic incident there. But do you think you need me to go more? You guys, because this is the last one I had, so we can conclude right here, wrap it up there. Unless I've got more in my head, but they're not all here at Island Beach State Park. So I'm going to conclude here. It's 1:30. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, the first vessel you were talking about that went.
The Llewelynn?
Yeah, that is at Area 13.
Oh, Area 13?
So, but it's all covered up now. I mean, it was, when the storm came, it washed all the sand away and it was visible.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of cool. I'll have to go flooping or something. These little wrecks have spots. You guys, I can tell you when I hear another story. I'll tell you one more story, right? And then we'll conclude here. This one isn't Island Beach State Park, though. This is a little bit further down. This is my favorite wreck, is the Almirante. I don't know if anyone heard of this wreck. All right, it's a little closer to Absecon Inlet, so it's out of our area here. But I love this one because in 2002, a guy named William Sharp, who now is like, he doesn't know, but he's like my best friend now. I much talk about this guy all the time. He doesn't even know it. So he was just a recreational diver, right? And in 2002, a lot of people dove the Almirante wreck. What happened with the Almirante wreck was right around the time of World War I. It was a United Fruit Company vessel, okay? And United Fruit Companies, that's all dollar diplomacy down in Central America. Banana plantations, right? As the American companies were building railroad tracks. So there were multiple plantations selling bananas, and they fought with one another. And the United Fruit Company became the more kind of like the monopoly, bought out, became a very big company. A lot of members of the Congress and the Eisenhower's had stock in the United Fruit Company. The United Fruit Company has kind of a dark history in its operations in South America. If you've read 100 Years of Solitude, at the very end they're talking about this revolution where the United Fruit Company shot a bunch of Colombian workers and put them on a train, and people are like, did this really happen? And people swear they witnessed this, and other people say it never happened. But it is the Chiquita. So we're eating a Chiquita banana. That was the United Fruit Company. So this boat, the Almirante, was their boat, and it was going from New York to Panama, and smacks into where the Navy actually hit it. Is in World War I right now. It hits it in 1918 and cuts this thing in half, and it goes down. And for days on end, all this white foam was washing up on the beach, and everyone thought it was flour. So they called it the flour wreck. Nobody knows what that white foam was. You can make all the jokes because it's going down to South America, somewhere in Central America. I have no idea. In their manifest, they said they just had produce, not flour, but nonetheless, it became known as the flour wreck. So in 1918, it's all smashed up, and it's sitting there, and it's only in like, you know, like 60 feet of water, 60, 70 feet of water. And then in World War II, the Coast Guard, you know, the blimps is flying, and it sees a shadow in the ocean. They say, oh, there's a sub. So they bombed it. They put death liners down there, and they blew it even more to pieces. So then it's just all these hulls are just lying, the steel hull. So my friend William Sharp. Now I like to, when I write Asbury, you know, I like to, you know, if there's some kind of history on a day, I'll write about it. You know, people enjoy reading history. So I was looking for something, like July 4th weekend was coming up. I was like, what could I write? Just, I'm not, you know, we're all going on vacation. I need a story that could sit for a couple days that people might enjoy reading. So I'm looking in the records, and I find this record set, July 4th, 2002. 22 years ago when I found out about this a couple years ago. The New Jersey's largest lobster that was ever caught was caught by this guy, Will Sharp. It was over 15 pounds. The carapace on it. Now, the way we measure, at that time you could take a 1/7 and 1/8 inch carapace on the lobster. Now it's 5 7/8. So you could never break this record because you'll never get a lobster that big now unless they change the regulation. So he's kind of safe. So he goes down there and he explained it to me. He's got like a Chris Craft type or like a bay liner, not a very, just kind of just a recreational diver. But still, he's going down 70 feet. So he's got all my respect. He goes down there, underneath the plate of steel, he finds this lobster and he goes back up to the deck and he says, I didn't get it. I'm gonna go back down and get it. It's huge, huge. So you know the thing about tickling lobsters, you put your hand in there, and he gets this thing, and he pulls it out, gets in his bag, comes up, and it's huge. The claws are bigger than his head. The body's down here, and he's like, whoa. And he brings it to Scott's Bait and Tackle on Mystic Island. And Scott's like, you might have a record here. At first he lied about where he caught it, because he didn't want anyone else to know his spot where he caught the thing. And they're like, no, you have to tell Fish and Wildlife the truth of where you got it. So he's like, I got it on the flower record. Nobody interviewed him in 2002. There was no talk about this great big lobster that this guy caught. So I was like, there's no story. So I'm like, July 4th, lobsters, everyone's buying lobsters. So people are gonna be searching online where to get lobsters, Who's got a sale on lobsters? So I call him up out of thin air. I'm like, I'm a complete stranger. I'm like, Bill. He's like, yeah. I'm like, I'm Dan Radel from the Asbury Park Press. Are you the guy who caught the lobster? He's like, yeah, man. I still got it. I was like, you still have it? He's like, yeah, I had it mounted. I'm like, all right, can I come down and talk? Yeah, come on down. So I knew where he lived because I looked him up. We have the press. We have certain tricks of the trade. We have public sources tell me this is his house, and he tells me another house, and he's down at the end of the world at some lagoon. So I'm driving my car down there, and I'm like, I see the house you told me is abandoned, and there's like rats like 6 feet high. I'm like, I'll play your game, Bill. So I walk over to the house. I can see Bill in the other house, looking out his blind to see who it was who was coming. So it calls you in the middle, 20 years later, right? So I go and I meet him in there, and lo and behold, there it is, the lobster claws and the car, and it's completely bleached white, and it's huge. And he told me he couldn't eat the whole thing in one day. He couldn't even get the whole thing in a pot. So he had to break it up. It took him a week, so he cooked one claw at a time, another claw at a time, and a body at a time. And his girlfriend, he hates her now, so he wouldn't want to mention her, because he was like, I ate her with her. And I was like, really cool story. I mean, he told me he was like a Jimmy Buffett type of guy, just down there, end of the world, not a care in the world, just, his whole life out there. Really interesting fella, great catch. So we write this story, and it's the biggest story I've ever written. It was like 20 years after the event. So many people read that, so like hundreds of thousands of people. I was like, holy cow. So we're like, and since then, I keep getting emails like, oh, I caught a bigger lobster. I'm like, well, where is it? Like, where's your proof? This guy proved it. He got it certified. There's bigger, it's not the biggest lobster in the world. There's bigger ones that were caught, but he had it certified. And it's now considered the state record New Jersey lobster. And because the regulation has changed, it'll probably never, ever be broken. So that's Will Sharp. I can end there, or, you know, or you guys want more? I think that's, you told me go a half hour. So thank you for coming, thank you for having me here. I'll develop more, and maybe we can do this again, you know, at another point in time. I'm always willing to do this stuff.
Any questions for Dan?
If you guys, yeah, go ahead, get back to it. I got a question.
When the McKinsey got unearthed, how did they know it was that ship? It was only a piece of wood, you know.
Well, it's in the spot where the New Jersey Maritime Museum had it marked. It was the only one at that spot. That's the best answer I can give you. It was there. If you look at it, where, I mean, I haven't been to visit this one personally, but if you look at the shipwreck map, there's only one at that spot. So it has to be that one. It's wood. It's in the right location. You could probably date it if they wanted to, but I don't think they did. They just came out and said, this is what it is. I got that information directly from the Park Service, who got it from the New Jersey Maritime Museum. Is it correct? I'm going on there.
This was recorded from 1890.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot here. There's a lot that happened. Everything that happened prior to like the 1900s, you're not going to find a lot of articles in the newspaper about this stuff. We just, you know, a lot of those papers were done or they didn't have them. And down here, this was the end of the world. You don't have to nobody did anything down here. I mean, it's so cool. I think when they started calling it Island Beach around 1953, 59, I think this was made apart, or 58. And it's Island Beach State Park, and it is a treasure. And I'm gonna come, you know, down here and do some biking this summer. I think this park is awesome. It's just this big. Well, I've seen it from the ocean a million times. It's just, you know when you're here because there's nothing. So, anyway, all right. Hope you guys had a good time. I had a good time. We'll do it again.
Yeah, a lot of